If someone's going to take tax dollar money, they need to be held responsible. The majority of families who are benefiting from vouchers is wealthy white suburban families. So we're already paying taxes. It's going into privatization. We have to pay more taxes, not in our house, not in our state, not in our community. 50% of our population in Indiana are being told what they can and cannot do with their body over a medical decision. Even if we raise it to $15 an hour, people can't make it on $15 an hour.
I am here with Jennifer McCormick, a lifelong educator as well as a former elected state superintendent who is now running as a Democratic candidate for governor of Indiana. Now, Indiana is one of the 18 states to never have a female governor, as well as not electing a Democrat in almost 20 years. So, Jennifer, how do you differ from what we've seen recently, which has been rather inefficient for Hoosiers, and why are you the person to move Indiana forward?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me with you. I truly appreciate this. And so, what makes me unique is really my background personally and professionally, and now politically. So, I think that combination of all those makes it kind of an interesting conversation and a unique candidate that people can get behind. So, when I ran in 2016, I ran on the Republican ticket. At the time, I was pretty centric, and people knew that I was doing it for the reason that was not political, that was all about kids and hoping to be part of a solution to what I saw needed a little bit of help at a state agency. So when I ran and was successful in 16, our track record at the Department of Education was very successful. And we were working in a bipartisan fashion, and we got a lot done, and people recognized it. So our name recognition politically is quite good. As far as people just know, I do it for the right reason. I run for people over politics. It's not about power. It's about empowering. It's about giving a voice and opportunity to Hoosiers. And I think people recognize that that's a proven track record of mine and appreciate it. The other thing personally is they like that I'm a fourth generation farm family. They like that I am a military mother. They like that I am the spouse of an educator. And he was a former wrestling coach as well, which, athletics in Indiana is kind of a popular thing. So they like that. We are just very, very everyday Hoosiers. I'm a working candidate, which is interesting in Indiana. But I think people appreciate that. They also appreciate that I was an educator for 10 years, and then I was a principal, local superintendent, and people can relate to what that is and what we do. And having that community feel, I think, is also very appealing to people.
That's something very refreshing to hear. Not only someone so strong in character running, but willing to put people over partisanship. With Republicans at large, and even in Indiana, you see more so where partisanship is more important than other things and just voting along the party line rather than what's best for the people in Hoosiers and Indiana. So I'm sure that's something you can speak to, having already worked with Republicans, being more of a moderate when we get into some of the issues in your campaign or issues that you want to cover on your platform. And that I wanted to get into. I saw that they were women's reproductive rights and education, which is wonderful because those are two things that are really in desperate need of help in Indiana. So I first wanted to get into women's reproductive rights. And I had a few things to rattle off, and then I wanted to get your position on it. As with Roe v. Wade's overturning, we've seen conservative states like Indiana kind of grow more draconian in the way they punish abortion and women for their bodily autonomy. Indiana not only led the way in being the first state to sign legislation after Roe was overturned, but some of the restrictions are disturbing, to say the least. To list a few quickly, it's banned completely except for fatal fetal anomaly, and rape victims are blocked after 10 weeks. This is despite most people not knowing they're pregnant until 5 or 6 weeks, it taking a few weeks to schedule the procedure sometimes. And specifically in Indiana, you first have to schedule in-person counseling to try and talk you out of the procedure and have an ultrasound even when medically unnecessary, which can then prolong this even more and even more. So as a politician, a woman, a Democrat, and as possible governor, how would you not only fix this issue, what would your position on it be?
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously I have one son. So I've had one pregnancy that was full term, but I also have a lot of friends and family members that have had wanted pregnancies that had a lot of complications. And so this isn't about just an unwanted pregnancy conversation. This is about unwanted and wanted pregnancies. It is a medical conversation. And so what do we do with all that, since Indiana was the first in the nation to get out on an extreme abortion ban? And I believe that if the election in 2024 doesn't go well, that they are signaling to us they don't think it went far enough. So it's not done per se. We're not at the end for them, in my opinion. You got contraception that's hanging out there. You've got, just the whole this can go further in what you just went through, which would be a very scary, very concerning, situation for a lot of people in the state of Indiana. There are a lot of females concerned, but there are also a lot of males concerned because they see it as 50% of our population in Indiana are being told what they can and cannot do with their body over a medical decision. And that should scare everybody. That should be alarming to everybody. It's also concerning to those who have young girls who are their daughters, their granddaughters, their nieces, their neighbors, as far as they're going to see less rights and freedoms that I have had for decades. And now that that's taken away, many of those in our younger generation we're turning back time. So it's very concerning. Now, the governor's office with the authority is quite interesting. So in Indiana, you still have the state agencies, you still have the boards and commissions, you still have the courts. I mean, there are a lot of things the governor can do. You also have a platform. So whereas in these other states that we have seen 11 of them successfully push for ballot referendums to say, where do the people stand on these issues? Abortion by far, is not or the abortion ban by far is not the majority of a popular issue. I mean, it is one that people will fight to keep the rights of women, our reproductive freedoms. So, the governor can, in addition to the platform and in addition to authority, make some headway in that arena. It will not be easy. And, when you're under a supermajority in the House and the Senate at the chambers, it's hard, but we're very, very close in the House. That would help out too, depending on how this next election goes. If we get a little bit of wiggle room in the House, that would be amazing. But first steps, we need to have a statewide office that has the authority, again, over boards, commissions, agencies, courts. I mean, that is incredibly important in order to make this move.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. In Indiana, 96% of counties don't have abortion clinics, and 70% of women in Indiana live in these counties. Is this something that you would be willing to direct funding to as governor? And then also, how would you work with Republicans in the state to kind of find middle ground on this issue?
Yeah, unfortunately, our access to care is very limited, as you mentioned. We are also losing healthcare providers. So when you are losing healthcare providers and your access to healthcare is starting to get limited in specific areas and in general practitioners, but in specific areas, it is very concerning. What do we need to do with that? One, it's our rhetoric. Two, it's the treatment of those healthcare providers that is in really, we're in a situation right now that's very unfortunate. But also, too, as you mentioned, helping with that funding and being a champion for those organizations who are trying to funnel money into Indiana, who are trying to, empower our healthcare providers and making sure they have the coverage needed in order to perform the care that is necessary.
Awesome. So in a lot of places where abortion is more limited, you see it trickle down to other places where like lower minimum wages, less Medicaid expansion, less quality education, which, as I mentioned, is something on your platform that I also wanted to get into. My first question with education, I have some issues and statistics about Indiana education that I want to get to. But first, I wanted to know your position on school choice, because in Indiana, voucher students on average saw their academic performance drop in math and reading, or at least not progress. In states like Louisiana and Ohio, they've fallen at twice the rates that we saw during like COVID-19 lockdowns. And in Indiana, only 28% of voucher households make less than $50,000 a year. And you're actually twice as likely to be making over $100,000 a year and be in one of these programs. And the last statistic I wanted to list is 64% of voucher students were already private school students. And a majority of these schools seemingly end only a couple years after starting, as if they were only there to take part in the funding that they're receiving. Is this something that you support, or would you do away with it, or how would you fix it from the issues we see currently?
Yeah, I have been very open since I was a local superintendent, state superintendent. Our privatization efforts in Indiana, which are a national push, let's not kid ourselves, it's a national push. It doesn't fit Indiana. It would over 90% of our families have signaled that they support our traditional public schools, but yet Indiana's supermajority of Republican leaders have taken an extreme approach to that to say we're going to funnel over $1 billion away from our traditional public schools into privatizations, which I have a real problem with. So calling for that to end would be step one. The other thing too is we should have the same transparency, accountability, admissions policies across the board. If someone's going to take tax dollar money, they need to be held responsible like a traditional public school, because at that point, when you are taking taxpayer money, that is the underlying foundation of a public school, in addition to the inclusivity of it, which they've been excluded from. So they should be treated no differently than a traditional public school. So yes, I would be very outspoken about it. The other thing too is it raises taxes. So you would think in Indiana, where you would have a lot of Republicans who are really against raising taxes, they would start paying attention to, we've created a system of vouchers where money is flowing away from our traditional public schools into privatization, which is requiring schools to run referendum, which requires schools to raise taxes. So we're already paying taxes. It's going into privatization. We have to pay more taxes in order to fund our schools. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but a lot of people don't quite understand it. So I have a lot of problems with the system we've developed. Again, I don't think it's going to get better. I think the Republican gubernatorial candidates and a lot of those running for the House and the Senate have signaled that they want to expand to universal. Not the only, but the majority of families who are benefiting from vouchers is wealthy white suburban families. So I live in Henry County. We are losing over $1 million a year as a county, and we have very few kids who are participating in that system. So Henry County people who are predominantly Republican should stand up and say, why are we doing that? And how does this work? But I mean, our legislators will tell us one thing, and we see the operations of it looking very differently. But we have to have a platform to educate people and empower our county leaders to stand up and say, enough. We're losing a ton of money. We're raising our taxes, and it's taking away from services that, again, 90, if not more, percent of our kids in our areas have signals we choose public school.
Yeah, so kind of similar to the last topic, how is this something that you would plan to reach across the aisle and work with Republicans on, since most of our state is taken up by Republican lawmakers? Would it be focusing on how it raises taxes, or how would you work to find middle ground there?
Yeah, I think the big thing with Republicans who can reach middle ground, which I think is very difficult because there's a lot of political money that's on the line to push that agenda. But I think one thing is most Republicans, all Democrats, most Republicans, independents, libertarians, we in Indiana like accountability and transparency with our tax dollars. So making sure that we make that point very evident to this is an area we could find some common ground. The other part is inclusivity, to try to find common ground on inclusivity of services and admissions. And so there are a lot of areas that if the Republicans are being honest with the way they approach taxes and accountability for spending, then let's find that common ground and let's hold people accountable and responsible.
Awesome. Yeah. And zooming out, I guess, to the public, or I guess education as a whole in Indiana, over 200,000 Hoosiers were chronically absent from school, and 1/5 of third graders cannot functionally read in the state. What is the core disconnect here as somebody who was in the system that you've seen, and how would you address those as governor?
So our funding for educators, who all the research will show you is the number one indicator of student success, is not keeping up with our neighboring states, the national statistics. So we have beat up teachers to the point where we have thousands of openings today. We also have set precedent that you can be hired as a teacher without a high school diploma in the state of Indiana. There is a provision for that to happen, and that is unacceptable. So if we're putting more kids in a classroom and underfunding our teachers, and we have an absence of the teachers we need, the lack of, that is a problem. So I'm not sure why anybody would be surprised that the results aren't what we want them to be. The other part of it is schools have lost valuable funding, and which equate to curriculum, instruction, assessment. And Indiana keeps funding and assessment change. So when we're looking at the data trends, it's hard to do apples to apples because we've recreated our testing so often in the state of Indiana and our curriculum that a lot of people were not even showing the the accurate data at this point. I've talked to a lot of schools that have reached out to the department to say the data that's on the website, it's not accurate and it doesn't get changed. So we really don't even know where exactly we are accurately. Our schools do, but as a state, we need to shore that up, which goes right back to the Department of Education and our legislation.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to hear somebody who has the experience and the know-how to actually address the education issue once and for all, rather than kind of playing hot potato with it. It seems what happens with things changing and not really knowing what to throw at it. I do kind of want to go to at least one more.
I do want to add with the changes where the disruption is, that is not by accident. So in order to establish that public schools are bad, you have to have that conversation. They rely on moving targets and data that doesn't look good and families that are upset because it pushes the privatization.
So I guess to follow up on that, how do you paint the picture to the more broader public then that this is what's happening and it's not what they're trying to paint?
Yeah, I mean, it's using platforms, right? It's getting to your chamber of commerce. It's getting onto the media and informing people of what's happening. It's making sure at the grassroots community level, people are informed. It's also empowering our superintendents to say, here is a turnkey way to do this without fear of retribution. And right now, that fear is real, and not just for superintendents, but also for school boards. I mean, the volatility of our school boards right now is crazy. And so we've not seen that in Indiana in some time. But again, that's being fueled by people who are really, really trying to push that privatization piece.
Yeah, and I always try to tell people a lot of it starts local, getting out and actually worrying about your school board, worrying about things like city council mayors, because those are the people who are going to be affecting things like education in your community. I do want to get to a couple more topics before we get to the end. Can you speak to the problems that the partisanship that you've seen in Indiana, kind of what it's causing? And again, how you said as somebody who's worked with Republicans was more of a moderate, more of a centrist in that regard, how would you fix that and get everyone at the table at once for Hoosiers better?
Yeah, well, I think people have appreciated, even on the campaign trail, we have made it very clear if we have meet and greets, anyone is welcome, regardless of political party. If people want to volunteer and donate, have at it. We're not checking political parties, which is equated to a lot of people across the aisle that have been extremely supportive. So during our former president's term, people had permission to really get extreme, and that extremism from the national has carried down. And so we need to have people who will push up on that, who will say that not in our house, not in our state, not in our community, but we have to have leaders to model that. And that's exactly what I intend to do. And a lot of Democrats who are also running on the ballot are really good people who have said, we want to work in a bipartisan fashion. That's the only way things can get done, but we need to do it in a civil way. I mean, this business of extremism, no one is very small percentage of people are buying into the extremism or support this extremism, but they're loud and they get a lot of attention. And so how do you divert from that? And that is a purposeful, action. And we just have to keep after it and take the high road and really approach this in a civil way.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. One more thing I want to touch on before I give you the floor, and you can speak to anything maybe we didn't get to cover, shout out your website and all those things, because I live in Indiana. And so this is an issue, something that I've been affected with and seen, and I want to ask, as having somebody who could be the governor in front of me, we are one of the few states that still have the $7.25 minimum wage. Is that something you consider fair? And if not, where would you like to see it get to, and how would you work to get it there?
Yeah, I mean, even if we raise it to $15 an hour, people can't make it on $15 an hour. At $15 an hour, you are having to have multiple jobs. I mean, it is very, very difficult. And our wage is so ridiculously low. A lot of states around us and across the nation just had a big push to raise it. Now, I know $15 an hour can go a little bit further in certain areas of the state than in other areas of the states, whether it's housing or whether it's, just expenses in general. I mean, I realize that. But yes, we have to raise that minimum wage, but also that includes empowering our unions. So when our unions are strong, typically what we see is wages across the board go up. And in Indiana, for decades now, we've tried to strip our unions. We saw it in the teaching profession. We see it, in right to work and across the board. So right now, unions are at a really interesting position where if we can empower our unions and go back to supporting our unions, that wage across the board will go up, but it absolutely has to be raised. But many people, given the situation we're in, that everybody's looking for folks to work. A lot of people right now are at least paying $10 an hour, a big chunk of our state, but it's still very, very difficult to make that. So do I support a wage increase? Absolutely. But I think it's a much broader conversation than just increasing the minimum wage.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's one of the things I've actually been pleasantly surprised with the Biden administration about: strengthening the NLRB board, supporting the UAW strikes, the card check certifications, because like you said, unions are a very important thing. And you can statistically see the benefits that everyone in the workforce gets from strong unions in a state. So like I said, I know we're getting near the end of the interview. I want to give you the floor. If there's anything we didn't cover, anything you wanted to jump back to, you could shout out your website, some events. The floor is yours. Let the people know.
Yeah, for me, it's about fighting against extremism and fighting for our everyday issues, as far as, our healthcare, our education, and our wages, and a lot of the environmental things that we didn't even have to, touch on today. But a lot of those things are concerning, as far as the quality of our water, the supply amount of our water, our air, the quality of our air. And there are just so many things that we need to be addressing versus what's happening at our state house. And so let's go back to real issues impacting Hoosier lives. And that is exactly what we plan to do in a bipartisan, common sense, civil way. We're always looking for volunteers. McCormickforgov.com. We have over 700 signed up, so our coalition is strong. We're always looking for donations, and there is, no matter how small or how large, it is extremely helpful at McCormickforgov.com. But all that is extremely helpful. We just ask, do you want to be part of the solution? No one can sit back and not do anything. We have to do something. And so you choose, whether that's door knocking, whether that's, on the phone for somebody, a candidate, across the board, whether that is donating, working campaigns. There's so much to do. But the most important thing for any of us: register to vote and go vote. If we vote, we win. But we have to register to vote, and we have to vote. And however people can help us get the word out that this issue of being 50 out of 50th on voter turnout is unacceptable. So we get what we vote for. And so we can no longer let that happen. So our most important message is: go to the website, be a part of our team, but also go vote.
Awesome. And yes, so guys, remember, if you enjoyed anything you heard today, if you want to keep up with Jennifer's platform, her events, or if you want to donate to her efforts, McCormickforgov.com. And Jennifer, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me. Maybe sometime in the future, we can get another interview to speak on some of the issues we didn't get to cover today. But thank you again.
Absolutely. Well done.
Yep. Awesome. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.